Well, I must tell you that we are crossing a psychological barrier, or crossing into a psychological milestone when we move into module 50. It seems like not all that long ago, although it might feel an eternity to some, when we were back talking about the basics of psychology and the background of psychology and how to think psychologically, all those things, back in the single digits. And now we are only 4 modules away from the end, which is really quite remarkable and quite an undertaking, I will say, for what I've attempted to do with this particular class. So we're going to look at schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, in a lot of ways, is the hallmark disorder, if you will, in psychology. Most people, when you think about or ask somebody about psychology, a lot of times they'll talk about schizophrenia. They may, depending on their level of psychological sophistication, may actually talk about depression. But a lot of times schizophrenia tends to be at least in the top 5 when people start talking about depression or about psych disorders themselves. Let's talk about symptoms first. The symptoms of schizophrenia are interesting simply because sometimes the wording is a little confusing. And actually, when we talk about schizophrenia itself, we're talking about a group of disorders, not just one, but a group of severe psychotic disorders that are characterized by 2 different things: disorganized thinking, disturbed perceptions is another one that is often identified. Perceptions. So this is one of these cases where you're going to be needing to use a lot of what you've already learned. So disturbed perceptions, and then inappropriate emotions and actions. Inappropriate emotions and actions. So schizophrenia is, as a group of disorders, has this disorganized or delusional kind of thinking. It has the disturbed perceptions and then inappropriate actions and emotions. When we talk about it, schizophrenia, by definition, this word means split mind, and it's in a lot of cases people think that schizophrenia is the same as dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, but it isn't, and it refers to a split from reality rather than a split personality, if you will. So as such, it is a chief example of psychosis because of the departure from reality itself. So some symptoms themselves, you oftentimes will see delusions, which are false belief systems. And if you've ever seen A Beautiful Mind, John Nash had a delusion of grandeur. He was a desired, a valuable component of hunting down the Russia and finding out what it's actually doing and so forth. And it's part of a delusional system of thought and beliefs that are part of that. Disorganized thoughts may result in what's referred to as selective attention. They will attend to only certain things in their field of focus, and they may experience hallucinations. Hallucinations can come in a variety of forms. They can be auditory, they can be gustatory, in other words, taste. They can be visual. Like I said, and if you have an opportunity to watch A Beautiful Mind, you'll see all of these particular symptoms in John Nash and in Russell Crowe's portrayal of them. Hallucinations usually are auditory, but they often take the form of voices making insulting statements or giving orders. On occasion, they will be visual, and like I said, in John Nash's case, they were visual. Now there are some subtypes to it, specifically 5 subtypes. The one that like I said, if you've seen a Beautiful Mind, there is the first is oftentimes referred to as paranoid schizophrenia. That is what John Nash and his son, by the way, had. With paranoid schizophrenia, it tends to be, not always, but it tends to be the most high functioning. But there's a preoccupation with delusions or hallucinations, usually of a persecutory nature or grandiosity. There's the disorganized type. And this usually has disorganized speech or behavior. There is a flat affect or inappropriate emotions. In other words, the emotions don't match the situation as they would for most of us. There's catatonic. And catatonic schizophrenia is characterized by immobility, extreme negativism, a parrot-like repetition called echolalia of another speech or movements. And I'll just put that in here if you're interested, echolalia. The fourth is referred to as undifferentiated. What that simply means is that the particular person is displaying a variety of symptoms across all of the ones above, and so we can't really nail down specific things related to it. And then the last one is residual, and that usually is the category given when the hallucinations have disappeared or the delusions have disappeared. So in some respects, residual is a remission of the symptoms that are part of schizophrenia. Now we have other 2 big categories, if you will, in schizophrenia, and one is what we refer to as process or chronic. It tends to develop slowly over time. The prognosis for this is pretty poor when it develops over time. On the other hand, we also have acute or reactive schizophrenia, and this tends to have a far better prognosis. Reactive. And then the prognosis is more positive in this case, oftentimes responds well to medication in each of these cases. So those are some of the subtypes. Recovery is far more likely in the acute and reactive. Recovery is very doubtful when it comes to the process or chronic aspects of it. Now, let's talk symptoms real quickly. And I'm gonna extend this little discussion we had here, and we'll go down here and talk a little bit more specifically. There are 2 key categories of symptoms. One we refer to as positive symptoms, and when I say positive, I'm not talking about things that are good. If you think of it, if you have a test, for example, a medical test, and you're informed that it was positive for the strep culture, then it means it's present. And so in this case, positive is symptoms that we can see or are present. And examples of this would be disorganized or deluded in their talk, inappropriate laughter, tears, or rage. Those are all so inappropriate emotion that we can identify and see. We also, the delusional thought process is also part of it. And those are, like I said, those are present. That's what's key to understanding positive symptoms. On the other hand, we have negative symptoms. And that would be, as you can probably guess, that has everything to do with the absence of certain things. So one is present, the other is absent. And in this case, then, what we have is the absence of, in terms of negative symptoms, a toneless voice would be a good example. In other words, a voice without tone. So they have a flat sounding voice. Another example would be an expressionless face. So they don't respond with happiness, with a smile, or even sadness. They're basically expressionless. So what's absent is expression. And then the other aspect is the being mute. So there's absence of voice. And that's the other aspect of it. So the keys to understanding these symptoms is that they're divided up into positive and negative symptoms. Positive symptoms are the ones that we actually see or are present, which would be inappropriate laughter, inappropriate tears or rage, delusional thought, disorganized thought and language are part of that positive. And then in the negative, we're talking about what's absent. So the toneless voice, expressionless face, or mute behavior. In other words, they don't speak. So that's a lot to process. I know you may want to rewind it so you can take it a little bit more slowly. But schizophrenia is a group of disorders, not just one. We have all of these subtypes down here that are all within the category of what we call schizophrenia. The big categories are process versus acute, or chronic versus acute. Chronic is the prognosis is very poor, and acute or reactive, it is far more likely that recovery will occur. Now, let's talk a little bit about understanding it and how it actually comes about.
The real John Nash, like most schizophrenics, did not imagine people. He heard bizarre voices.
Did aliens speak to you?
When I began to hear voices, I thought of the voices as from something of that sort.
Mm-hmm. What would they say to you?
Well, you see, it's really my subconscious talking. It was really that, and of course, I know that now.
By 1958, John Nash seemed to have it all. A beautiful wife, a remarkable career. But shortly after his 30th birthday that same year, the same year Fortune magazine named him one of the country's mathematical stars, it all began to fall apart. He began to see conspiracies and hidden messages where there were none.
Alerted, you were extra-normally alerted to hidden truths.
So when you...
You're exceptionally enlightened.
Really?
That state of enlightenment is, of course, the brain disease schizophrenia, which affects up to 1% of adults and has no cure. So many schizophrenics end up going in and out of institutions, as John Nash did so many times in the 60s. Just last week, we took Dr. Nash back to one of those asylums, Trenton Psychiatric, a half hour from the Princeton campus.
The police came to pick you up?
Well, that's the typical procedure.
You later called it torture.
Well, I began to think of myself as being treated like an animal.
Brilliant, creative, abrasive. And here I see him wandering the town as a homeless person, very often like a zombie. I think perhaps after he'd had insulin shock treatments, he really was like a zombie.
Weibull reported back to Stockholm that this man, who had changed the face of economics in his 20s, deserved the Nobel regardless of his mental status.
Did you know at that time that they were considering you for the Nobel?
No, I didn't have any thoughts of that type.
He was looking at you. He was scouting you. They were afraid that you might do something, quote, crazy.
Yes, of course, it's a bad possibility.
He didn't do anything crazy. And in 1994, Dr. Nash was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics, which his friend Kuhn wrote about years later.
Recognition, you write, is a cure for many ills.
Absolutely. John was a person who wouldn't beat your eyes. After the prize, he was a changed man. People would greet him on the streets of Princeton. He would react and answer. It just made the difference. And it continues.
Continues, of course, with the Oscar-nominated film version of his life starring Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe played you in the film. Would he have been your choice to play you?
No, I guess not.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that you had the notion that maybe Tom Cruise would be the right guy.
No, that was their idea. I said, no. He's associated with these action movies, and he's rather short.
His and Alicia's son, Johnny, who shares more than just a name with his father, he also shares a talent for math. Johnny earned his own Ph.D. in 1985, and, like his father, he suffers from schizophrenia.
What kind of a father was he?
Well, he wasn't around for the first 10 years of my life, but when he came back at age 10, he was a very good father, yes.
Was there any doubt in your mind that you wanted to be a mathematician?
Oh, no, there was no doubt at all, yes.
You wanted to follow in your father's footsteps?
Absolutely. To do honor to Dad, to follow in his footsteps, that was always my life's dream. I still felt that I could equal him, that I could... I haven't done so yet, but I'm trying to.
He could do a lot if he would really think clearly. What he really needs is to get his thinking in order, to more rational.
More rational.
Strictly rational.
Rational thought.
Yes. It's like a diet.
You reasoned your way out of these delusions?
I became disillusioned with some of the delusions.